Hello, it's Maggie, the Treasure Crafter here. I began making a quilt for my sister-in-law's birthday a few weeks ago, calling it the Shabby Chic Rose Garden Trellis Quilt. And I completed the blocks for the roses in video 1. If you haven't already seen that, go back and watch it. In this video, I want to show you how to create the trellis and how to join the topper and complete the topper together. And then in the third video, I'll show you how to create a quilt sandwich and how to quilt it on a domestic machine. And that's going to be a challenge. So let's take a look then of what I've done so far. I needed to lay it out on my bed to create the design. Now you'll notice that I've weighted the larger roses at the bottom and the lighter ones at the top, and that the leaves all go in different directions. So let's take a look at it on my bed. I'm fortunate to have this second machine. This is my vintage hand-cranked Singer-Sew machine. And I'm going to sew my lines across. Now, I've marked them each and marked them with a post-it note. So I'm going to sew each seam together with a 1/4 inch seam. I'm going to pin them together and then sew. And the reason that I'm using this machine at the moment is because beside me I've got the television on and I'm watching and listening to the Olympic Games. I can't see that and see what's going on if I'm in the kitchen. So the other thing is I'm using a white cotton thread in the top and the bobbin. Although this is off-white, it doesn't really matter because this isn't going to show at all. Right, let's get sewing. So if you keep the post-it notes in place, and you can see I'm sewing right sides together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. To create my trellis, I've got 2 shades of bias binding. This is 1 inch bias binding, cotton. This is mustard gold and chocolate brown. And I'm looking for something that will create a 3D effect. From each of them, I'm going to take a 9 inch length. First, I place the 2 bias bindings back to back, and then I'm going to open out these 2 side seams. If you can see, what I've done is I've pinned where the 2 seams meet, and then I'm sewing down this seam. To do this, I'm using a chocolate brown thread. Now for each row, I need 1 between each block, so I need 6 per row times 9, and that's 54 of these 9 inch double bias binding strips. Press that central seam of the bias binding open. The ironing board, I'm going to iron these on the reverse and press those seams open, and you can see I've just done 1 row at a time. Down each seam I'm placing a piece of fusible. It's double-sided hemming web. This is from Hemline. This is 19mm, 25 metres on a roll. I've got another roll on order too because I'm going to need a lot of this. This is 1 inch, 1 inch wide. Place that down the centre of the seam on the front. Now take 2 pins, and I've found the centre of the seam of the sewn together bias binding, and I'm going to line that up with the centre of the seam. Can you see my pin there? And pin that together. I'm on the ironing board, so it will take just a little bit of a push through. Then I'm just going to iron over the top of that to melt the glue on the hemline tape, on the fusible webbing. It takes about 5 seconds. Hold down on the iron. Pin out to make sure I get the edges. And then repeat that process along each seam and make sure it's secure in place. Use clips to hold it in place. For a 3D effect, I'm needing to apply that there's a light source, as if it was light shining on wood. So the light is coming from the left and from the top. Always put your lightest piece of bias binding to the left. You'll find that some of the leaves go behind the trellis. That's fine, that would happen in nature, but try to leave your petals free if you can. Fold them back if you need to. This will be more obvious when you do larger flowers. We're going to come very close and even behind that trellis on the larger ones. I'm attaching line 1 to line 2, and I'm going to use that same pin trick to go through, and I'm going through the seam. It's the seam centre, so I'm going to move that needle ever so slightly over, pin ever so slightly over, to make sure that my seams match up. Then pin, and then I'll make sure I pin in the middle, and then I'm going to sew those together using a white cotton again. You'll see it's the edge of the fabric that I've lined up, not the edge of the webbing. Remember, I cut this at 9 inches, so I'm going to cut the excess off once I've secured it by sewing this seam line. It's been sewn, I'm just going to cut off the excess of bias binding. See that the bias binding meets up. Now I'm going to repeat that now, but I'm going to do 2 lines at a time. So 3 to 4, 5 to 6, 7 to 8 and 9, and then I'll start adding them together. So far I'm only connecting the rows, not the columns across. I find it easier to create it in 2 halves. This is rows 5 to 9, and I'm gonna do rows 1 to 4 and then connect between 4 and 5. That way you're not holding too much weight. Well, I'm using my hand cranked Singer sewing machine 99K, and because I can't alter the stitch length on this, it's around about a 2.25. I'd use anything between a 2 and a 2.5 here on another machine. The other thing that my machine here doesn't like doing a back stitch, so I do a small knot at the beginning and at the end. And at the moment I'm watching the Olympics. It's the male gymnastics individual team event. We've got Djokovic and Alcaraz competing against each other at the tennis, and a Brit has just won the rifle shooting. No, she's just got a silver medal, I think. So it's all going on, and then tonight there's athletics as well. It's all very exciting, and I think the coverage from Paris has been very good. I've really enjoyed watching it so far. Of course, I've got my headphones on to listen to that while I'm sewing. Pleased to say I didn't run out of bias binding. Now I've cut this at 60 inches and I need 8 of this, so that's 480 inches to go across the horizontal trellis length, and I'm going to cut that in both colours. Just a word of caution about colour matching. This is the same bias binding colour request from the same eBayer, and very evidently don't match. They're both ordered and supplied as being mustard gold. Now fortunately I had enough of that to finish the project. Make sure you have enough to finish your project before you begin. I'll certainly use this in another project because it really is a nice colour. If you have a slight mismatch on matching up your binding, then this method will cover that up. Once you put a straight piece across the top, it looks correct. Notice where I've placed the pins. I've actually not caught in the outside edge because that's where I want to stitch. I've gone in the middle of the bias binding. Although I've used two bias bindings sewn together, you might achieve the effect you want just using one piece of bias binding, or consider an alternative. Here I suggest lace. You could use ribbon, satin ribbon, velvet ribbon. How about some hessian? Or this is hemming web. I use this for straps on bags or aprons. Anything that will create a lattice effect will do. You don't have to stick to this idea that I've come up with. Right, that's the topper finished. This is the time that you need to look at it and stand back, just to make sure that you haven't put on the binding the wrong way up and that all looks correct. The next stage is for me to create a quilt sandwich and to actually quilt this together and complete the quilt. I'll be doing that in part 3, so please make sure that you come back and join me for that. If you've enjoyed spending time with me and watching these videos, please like, subscribe so that you don't miss part 3, and please come back and join me soon. This is Maggie, the Cheshire Crafter. Bye.